veterans don't realize that dependency can increase their monthly compensation award, sometimes by several $100s per month. Oftentimes, veterans do realize that if they are combined at a 30% total rating, dependency is available, but there's often many other factors and lesser known issues that arise during dependency that can impact their award. Today, we're going to look at some of those factors and how they ultimately impact a veteran's dependency award.
So first off, we should probably say, what's a dependent?
Yes, absolutely. That's a good place to start.
So first off, of course, most common, a spouse. This is someone who you were legally married to. And I will say that common law marriages can count, but it depends actually on what state you live in, whether your state recognizes it, and how it's documented. You can also, a lot of people don't know this, you can actually also receive dependency compensation for parents that you substantially provide some financial support for. There are some income thresholds that are set, and it varies based on whether you're supporting one of your parents or both of your parents. And this is obviously subject to change as years go on, but it's important to have a look at that to see if you qualify for the support you give your parents. And of course, children. A child under the age of 18 automatically will count. This is an adopted child, a biological child, or a stepchild. But you can also receive dependency benefits for a child between the ages of 18 and 23 if they're attending a qualifying institution for further education, for example. And finally, permanently incapacitated children can also remain on the award after the age of 18, but they have to have become incapacitated or incapable of self-support before turning 18. And whenever you file for any of these dependents, it's always important to remember you need to send it on the proper form. The form for all dependents is 21-686C, but there's a different form for parents and for school-aged children.
Yeah, exactly. And so as you were just saying, VA adds specific dollar amounts for each dependent that's added on. And so that essentially stacks on top of each other.
Yep.
And so the more dependents that you have, the more money is stacked onto whatever the veteran's monthly award is. And so as an example, a veteran might be rated at 40% combined rating, and they have a spouse as a listed dependent. They're going to receive an additional amount stacked onto the reward for the spouse. Now, if that same veteran has a spouse and a child added, they're going to receive additional compensation, not just for the spouse, but for the child stacked onto that award. And that's all going to be in excess of what a single veteran with no dependents would have. And so just think of it, I think stacking blocks on top of each other is a good way of thinking of it as additional dependents, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a child, potentially a dependent parent. All those things factor in, as you mentioned. Once a child turns 18, this is something that we see often. A child turns 18, they've been on the Veterans Award as a dependent minor child, but the child is continuing on into school,
right,
college, or some sort of vocational school. And so long as the veteran can provide proof, oftentimes a transcript, that the veteran's child who is over 18 is continuing on into a qualified institution, then VA will continue to pay dependency awards during that, during the time that the veteran's child who is over 18 continues on through school. For that, it's important that veterans know about and file VA Form 21-674.
Right.
And it's a pretty simple form. It's a document that accompanied with the appropriate supporting evidence, like a transcript, will allow VA to, number one, know that the veteran intends to continue the child on his or her award even after the age of 18, and allows VA to take the necessary action to keep the award going uninterrupted.
Mm-hmm. Now, earlier we talked a bit for a while about aid in attendance and special monthly compensation. And a lot of times when we're pursuing those cases, it's actually your dependent who is supporting you to receive that benefit. So if you have a dependent, most times it's a spouse or a child, adult child, that is providing assistance with activities of daily living, you can apply for a special monthly compensation. the dependent's assistance doesn't have to be professional or paid. This is based on the level of the veteran's need. So you can submit a VA Form 21-2680 completed by a medical professional, but you could also submit statements from your dependent, whether it's your spouse or child, for example. And this could end up being hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars more than a regular rating without this added benefit.
Another interesting point, which is often overlooked actually, is that if a spouse of a disabled veteran is requiring help with activities of daily living, then the veteran may qualify for additional compensation known as spousal aid and attendance. And so the veteran continues to need to be rated at least 30% combined, just like for dependency. But if the veteran is so rated and can show proof that the veteran's spouse requires the requisite help with activities of daily living, then spousal aid and attendance is also available as additional compensation. It's important, though, to note that medical evidence is often required. VA won't often grant this benefit, at least in my experience, on their own without a nudge or without an argument or some additional evidence, because they don't know usually the condition that the veteran spouse is in. So this is something that veterans should consider, raise, provide medical evidence, maybe a doctor's note or a statement if the doctor will provide one. There's a VA Form 21-2680 that they'll want to take a look at and complete. But really, it requires that the veteran show, again, that the spouse requires regular assistance with activities of daily living. And so lay evidence can be helpful here, medical evidence, and a nudge for sure for VA to investigate and adjudicate it.
Definitely. And let's shift over now. Let's talk about the effective date of dependency. VA can owe retroactive compensation for benefits, including dependency benefits, but there's a catch. The effective date for dependency back pay will either be the date of the event. So this could be birth, marriage, adoption, but that's only if the claim is filed within a year of that event. Otherwise, VA will only begin compensating for that dependency change when you file the request. So it's always important when you receive an award letter to check to see what dependents you're being compensated for. And if you're even being compensated, sometimes you might think when you receive an initial reward that, oh, I'm assuming my dependents are on there. I think VA knows I'm married. But it might not be officially documented in the record. So it's important to pay close attention to that and take the necessary steps to make sure your dependents are on the award. Absolutely.
And it changes over time, right? Everyone's life changes. People get married. Sometimes people get divorced. People have kids. And so VA, as with a lot of things, is often not up to date. And so, as you mentioned, it's critically important for veterans to check their award letter and make sure that their current situation is reflected on their award. Have they had a new child since the last time that VA issued an award? Has that child been added? Did their marital status change? Those things really factor into, one, making sure that benefits going forward are accurately compensating you to the maximum amount allowed under law, but also, if something is inaccurate, making sure that the veteran catches it and corrects it with VA, because they want to make sure that they're avoiding potential overpayments that could be created from being incorrectly or overpaid. So that's sometimes just as important as making sure that veterans receive the maximum amount allowed, is to prevent them from being overpaid and having to get a bill to repay, or having their benefits reduced to repay something that's owed back to the government. A couple other things, you had mentioned these regarding forms. File the VA Form 21-686C. This is the standard addition, subtraction, dependency form. It can be filed even before a veteran's eligible to receive dependency, which is another key point. A veteran might be combined at a rating of 10% or anything less than 30%. And so they haven't reached the threshold for dependency benefits yet. but it could be a good strategy to submit the form with dependency information. And so in theory, the second that VA grants the benefit that allows them to become eligible to cross the threshold to receive dependency benefits, boom, VA has all the information it needs to just automatically grant dependency with the award.
They should.
They should. They should. We talked about this form too, 21-674. Again, this is the form for veterans to review, complete, and submit if they wish to continue on with dependency benefits for a child who is over 18 but is continuing on with their education in some way.
Once you have your dependents on your award, it's best to review your award annually just to make sure that you're keeping up with the changes and you are preventing any negative outcomes, like Mike talked about, overpayments, or missing out on benefits that you deserved.